Jake Morrison looked out the window of his ship as it moved toward Nexus Prime. The planet below was huge and covered in bright lights. Thousands of ships from different worlds floated around it like metal fish in space. Each ship looked different because each one came from a different alien race. "First time seeing this many aliens in one place," said Admiral Lisa Park. She stood next to Jake, watching the ships move in careful patterns around the planet. Her uniform was clean and pressed, but Jake could see she was ready for trouble. "Not exactly a friendly invitation," replied Ben Clark. He was reading the message they got from the Galactic Council 3 weeks ago. The words were polite, but the meaning was clear. "Come to Nexus Prime. Come now. Don't bring weapons. Don't bring your fleet." Jake had been Earth's main ambassador for 5 years. In that time, he had met with dozens of alien races. Some were friendly, some were not. But he had never seen them all work together like this. Something had scared them enough to unite against humanity. The human ship was small compared to the giant vessels around them. Jake counted at least 50 different types of alien ships. Some looked like crystals that grew in space. Others were long and thin, like needles. A few were so strange that Jake couldn't figure out which end was the front. "How many species do you think are here?" asked Dr. Rachel Stone. She was humanity's top expert on alien life. Her job was to study other races and figure out how they thought. "The invitation said 847 species would attend," Ben answered. "Looks like they all showed up." Admiral Park checked her watch. "We dock in 20 minutes. Everyone remember the plan?" Jake nodded. The plan was simple. Listen to what the aliens had to say. Don't make promises. Don't sign anything. Report back to Earth. But Jake knew it wouldn't be that easy. The Galactic Council didn't call meetings like this just to chat. They wanted something from humanity. The question was what, and how far they would go to get it. The docking process took an hour. Alien ships moved in and out of the station in a pattern that looked like a dance. Jake's ship was guided to a small docking bay near the bottom of the station. Not exactly the VIP treatment dot. When they stepped off their ship, Jake got his first real look at Nexus Prime Station. The halls were huge, big enough for the largest alien species to move around easily. The walls were made of some kind of metal that changed colors as they walked past. Aliens filled the corridors. Jake saw creatures that looked like walking trees. Others had too many arms or legs to count. Some floated in the air without any visible means of support. A few were so small they rode on the backs of larger aliens. "Stay together," Admiral Park said quietly, "and keep your eyes open." They followed a floating guide robot through the station. Other aliens stopped to stare at the humans as they passed. Jake noticed that none of the stares were friendly. Some aliens moved away when they saw the human group coming. "Popular bunch, aren't we?" Ben muttered. The robot led them to a waiting area outside the main council chamber. Through the transparent walls, Jake could see inside the chamber. It was enormous. Seats arranged in circles went up as far as he could see. Each section was designed for different types of aliens. Some areas had water for aquatic species. Others had thick atmosphere for creatures that breathed different gases. "Impressive," said Dr. Stone. "This is the largest gathering of intelligent species in galactic history." Jake wasn't impressed. He was worried. In his experience, when this many people got together to talk about you, it usually meant trouble. A tall, thin alien approached. Their group. It had blue skin and 4 arms. Its voice sounded like music when it spoke. "Humans, I am Coordinator Veltar. The council is ready for you." Jake looked at his team one more time. Admiral Park stood straight and ready. Ben carried a briefcase with Earth's official documents. Dr. Stone had her recording equipment to capture everything that happened. General Kyle Turner, Their military advisor watched everything with careful eyes. "Let's go hear what they have to say," Jake said. The doors to the council chamber opened with a sound like thunder. Jake stepped inside and stopped. He had seen pictures of this place, but being here was different. The chamber was so big that he couldn't see the far wall. Thousands of aliens filled the seats, all looking down at the small human group. Jake walked to the center of the chamber. A platform rose from the floor to lift him up where everyone could see him. The noise in the chamber died away until the only sound was the breathing of 1,000 different species. At the highest point in the chamber sat the Council of Five. These were the oldest and most powerful species in the galaxy. Jake had met with each of them before, but never all together like this. The first to speak was Chancellor Mordeth of the Xanthari. His crystal body caught the lights and threw rainbows across the chamber. "Humans of Earth," his voice rang out clear and cold. "You have been called here to answer for your actions. Your species has disturbed the peace of the galaxy. Your expansion threatens the order we have maintained for millions of years." Jake said nothing. He just listened. "You colonize worlds without permission. You build ships faster than any young race should. You fight wars with a violence that frightens even our warrior species. This cannot continue." More aliens began to speak. Each one had complaints about humanity. The humans were too aggressive, too fast, too unpredictable. They didn't follow the rules that other species had followed for ages. Jake realized this wasn't a trial. It was an intervention. The galaxy had decided that humanity was a problem that needed to be solved. The question was what solution they had in mind. The second day of the council meeting was worse than the first. Jake Morrison sat in his chair and listened as alien after alien stood up to complain about humanity. Each species had a long list of problems with human behavior. Admiral Lisa Park took notes on her tablet. The accusations were serious, but many of them didn't make sense to her. The aliens seemed upset that humans acted like humans. The Vorthic representative was speaking now. She was a large insect-like creature with 6 arms and compound eyes that reflected the chamber lights. Her voice buzzed when she talked. "The humans show no respect for established territory," she clicked. "They land on worlds that have been empty for thousands of years and claim them as their own. They say these worlds belong to no one, but this is not how civilized species behave." Dr. Rachel Stone frowned as she listened. The Vorthic were talking about human colonies in the Outer Rim. Those worlds had been surveyed by human scouts and found to be completely uninhabited. No cities, no life signs, no claim markers. By every law humans knew, those worlds were free for anyone to settle. But the aliens seemed to think differently. The next speaker was an ethereal, a being made of pure energy that floated above the chamber floor. When it spoke, its voice sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "The humans disturb sacred spaces," the ethereal said. "They mine and build on worlds that hold the history of our ancestors, places that should remain untouched for all time." Ben Clark wrote down the ethereal's words. This was the first time he had heard about sacred spaces. The humans had never received any warnings about these areas. No one had told them which worlds were supposed to be off-limits. General Kyle Turner watched the alien faces around the chamber. He had fought in 3 wars before becoming a military advisor. He knew what enemies looked like when they were preparing for battle. Many of the aliens here had that same look. The Drakmari representatives stood next. The Drakmari were a warrior race that looked like giant lizards. They were covered in scales and had sharp teeth that showed when they talked. "We have watched human soldiers in combat," the Drakmari general said. "They fight with a fury that goes beyond normal warfare. They do not simply seek victory. They seek to survive at any cost. This makes them dangerous in ways we do not understand." Admiral Park looked up from her notes. She knew what the Drakmari was talking about. Human. Soldiers did fight differently than other species. When humans went to war, they fought like their entire race depended on winning. Because often it did. The accusations continued for hours. The Kolari complained that human traders didn't follow proper business customs. The Nexari said human scientists asked too many questions about alien technology. The Polter claimed that human diplomats were too direct and didn't show enough respect for older races. Jake listened to it all without saying a word. The pattern was becoming clear. The aliens weren't upset about anything humans had actually done wrong. They were upset because humans didn't act like the other young races that had joined the galaxy. Most new species spent centuries learning galactic customs before they dared to expand beyond their home systems. They asked permission before colonizing new worlds. They followed the guidance of older races. They accepted their place at the bottom of the galactic hierarchy. Humans had done none of these things. Dr. Stone realized something that made her stomach feel cold. The aliens weren't just complaining about human behavior. They were afraid of it. These ancient races that had controlled the galaxy for millions of years were actually scared of a species that had only been in space for 200 years. The fear was in their voices when they spoke. It was in the way they looked at the human delegation. It was in the fact that 847 different species had come together just to talk about humanity. The final speaker of the day was Prime Counselor Zarthex of the Hegemony. The Hegemony was the oldest spacefaring civilization in the galaxy. They had been traveling between stars when humans were still living in caves. X was ancient even by Hegemony standards. His body was thin and pale, and his eyes were completely black. When he spoke, his voice was so quiet that the chamber's sound system had to amplify it. "Young humans," he said, and the words carried the weight of eons. "You do not understand the delicate balance that keeps peace in this galaxy. Your species moves too fast, claims too much, and shows too little wisdom. You threaten to upset an order that has existed since before your son was born." Jake felt anger rising in his chest, but he kept his face calm. The alien was talking about humans like they were children who didn't know any better. "We have seen young races before," Zarthex continued. "Most learn their place in time. Some must be taught. A few must be contained for the good of all." The last word hung in the air like a threat. Jake looked around the chamber and saw thousands of alien eyes staring down at him. For the first time, he understood what this meeting was really about. Galaxy wasn't trying to negotiate with humanity. They were trying to decide what to do about humanity. And containment was apparently one of the options on the table. Admiral Park caught Jake's eye and nodded slightly. She had reached the same conclusion. This wasn't diplomacy. It was a sentencing hearing. Ben Clark closed his briefcase with a chi. Soft click. All the legal documents and trade agreements he had brought seemed pointless now. The aliens had already made up their minds about humanity. General Turner shifted in his seat. His hand moved closer to the sidearm he wore, despite the Council's request that humans come unarmed. The movement was tiny, but Dr. Stone noticed it. She could feel the tension building in her teammates. The chamber fell silent as Zarthex finished speaking. Jake stood up slowly, knowing that everyone was watching him. He looked around the vast space filled with alien beings, and for a moment, he felt the weight of representing his entire species. "We will consider everything we have heard today," Jake said. His voice carried clearly through the chamber's acoustics. "Humanity will provide its response tomorrow." It wasn't much of a speech, but Jake didn't want to say more until he knew what game the aliens were playing. He had a feeling that tomorrow would bring answers he didn't want to hear. As the human delegation left the chamber, Jake could feel the eyes of 847 species watching their every step. The whispered conversations that started behind them sounded like the buzzing of angry insects. Something was coming, and Jake had the feeling that humanity was about to face its greatest challenge since leaving Earth. The third day started differently. When Jake Morrison and his team entered the council chamber, they found a single document waiting on their table. It was written in perfect English, which meant the aliens had spent time preparing this specifically. For humanity. Admiral Lisa Park picked up the document first. The title made her jaw tighten. Galactic Council Resolution 94.7, the Humanity Containment Protocol. She passed it to Jake without saying a word. As he read the first page, Jake felt his blood pressure rising. This wasn't a negotiation or a treaty. It was a list of demands disguised as a generous offer. Ben Clark read over Jake's shoulder. His diplomatic training helped him understand the legal language, but even he was shocked by what the document contained. They want to limit us to 12 systems, Ben whispered. 12 systems for the entire human race. Dr. Rachel Stone looked at the star charts attached to the document. The 12 systems they were offering were mostly barren worlds with few resources. 3 of them didn't even have planets suitable for human life. General Kyle Turner studied the military clauses. According to the protocol, all human warships would be subject to galactic inspection. Human military technology would have to be shared with the Council. No human could hold a rank higher than colonel without alien approval. The document was 30 pages long, but the message was simple. Accept your place as a junior species, or face the consequences. Chancellor Mordith stood up in his crystal, formed to address the chamber. His voice rang out clear and cold as winter air. The Galactic Council has spent 3 days documenting humanity's violations of established norms, he announced. We have prepared a fair and reasonable solution that will allow humans to remain part of the galactic community while ensuring the stability that all species require. Jake kept reading. The protocol required humans to abandon 90% of their colonies. All human settlements in what the aliens called restricted space would be evacuated within 5 years. Families that had lived on frontier worlds for generations would be forced to leave their homes. But the worst part was the oversight clause. Earth itself would host a permanent alien monitoring station. Every human government decision would be reviewed by alien observers. Human children would be educated according to galactic standards, not human ones. Admiral Park could see her hands shaking as she read. These aliens wanted to turn humanity into a pet species, keep them around for curiosity, but never let them grow strong enough to be a threat. The Vorthic representative spoke next, her insect voice buzzing with what might have been satisfaction. The protocol is generous beyond what many species received when they joined the galactic community, she clicked. Humanity will retain their homeworld and be granted protected status under galactic law. They will have representation in the Council, though without voting rights on major decisions. Dr. Stone felt sick as she read the cultural clauses. Human art, music, and literature would be subject to galactic review before being shared with other species. Human scientists could. Only research topics approved by the Council. Human history books would be rewritten to fit galactic standards. They wanted to erase what made humans human. The ethereal representative floated forward, its energy form shimmering with colors that hurt to look at directly. The protocol recognizes that young species often struggle with the transition to galactic citizenship, it said in its wind chime voice. Humanity will receive guidance from experienced races to help them develop properly. This guidance will continue until humans demonstrate the wisdom necessary for full independence. Ben Clark translated that in his head. Humans would be under alien control forever, or at least until they became so much like other galactic species that they stopped being human. General Turner noted the enforcement clauses buried in the middle of the document. If humanity refused to comply with any part of the protocol, they would face corrective action from a joint galactic fleet. The aliens had already positioned ships throughout human space, ready to enforce their will. Jake finished, reading and looked up at the thousands of alien faces staring down at him. Each species had sent their best representatives to this meeting. The chamber contained some of the most powerful beings in the galaxy, and they were all united in their fear of humanity. The Drakmari general stood to speak, his scaled form towering over even the largest humans. The protocol offers humans a choice. He growled. Accept the wisdom of older races and find their proper place in the galactic order, or continue their reckless expansion and face the combined might of 847 species. That was the threat Jake had been waiting to hear. Submit or be destroyed. Admiral Park calculated the odds automatically. The human fleet consisted of roughly 200 combat-capable ships. The aliens had shown footage of over 10,000 ships just in this system alone. The math was simple and terrifying, but Jake had spent 5 years studying these alien species. He knew their histories, their cultures, their fears, and he was beginning to understand something that made him smile for the first time in 3. Dazed out Prime Counselor Zarthex rose from his seat with the slow dignity of extreme age. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of millions of years of galactic dominance. Humanity has 24 hours to provide their answer, he announced. We trust that your species will choose wisdom over pride. The galaxy offers you a place among us. Do not force us to reconsider that generosity. The chamber fell silent after the old being finished speaking. Jake could feel the weight of history pressing down on the moment. This was the point where humanity would either bow to galactic authority or chart its own course among the stars. Dr. Stone looked at her teammates and saw something in their eyes that the aliens had missed. The humans weren't weighing their options or considering surrender. They had already made their decision. Ben Clark closed the protocol document without finishing the last 10 pages. He had read enough to understand what the aliens wanted. Complete. Submission disguised as peaceful coexistence. General Turner checked his watch. In 24 hours, humanity would give its answer to the galaxy's ultimatum. He wondered if the aliens had any idea what that answer would be. Jake stood up slowly, knowing that every eye in the chamber was on him. The aliens expected him to ask for more time or to begin negotiating the terms of humanity's surrender. Instead, he simply nodded to Prime Counselor Zarthex and said, 24 hours. We understand. As the human delegation left the chamber, Jake could hear the aliens beginning to discuss humanity's response. They sounded confident that humans would see reason. After all, no young species had ever been foolish enough to stand against the entire galaxy. But Jake knew something the aliens didn't. Humans had been standing against impossible odds since they first looked up at the stars, and they had never learned how to surrender when their freedom was at stake. The next 24 hours would change everything. The council chamber filled quickly on the 4th day. Alien representatives took their seats with an air of satisfaction. They had given humanity a night to think about the reality of their situation. Surely the humans would see that cooperation was their only choice. Jake Morrison walked into the chamber with his team behind him. Admiral Lisa Park wore her dress uniform, every medal and ribbon perfectly placed. Ben Clark carried the same briefcase he had brought every day, but today it seemed heavier in his hands. Dr. Rachel Stone had her recording equipment ready to capture whatever happened next. General Kyle Turner entered last, his eyes scanning the chamber with the careful attention of a soldier. He noted the positions of the security forces, the exits, and the locations of the most important alien leaders. The human delegation took their seats in absolute silence. No conversation, no last-minute planning, no nervous whispers. They sat, like statues, while thousands of alien eyes watched them. Chancellor Mordith's crystal form reflected the chamber lights as he stood to speak. His voice carried the confidence of someone who believed the outcome was already decided. "Representatives of Earth," he announced, "the Galactic Council awaits humanity's response to our generous offer. We trust that a night of reflection has helped your species understand the wisdom of accepting our guidance." Jake Morrison stood slowly. Around the chamber, aliens leaned forward in their seats, eager to hear humanity's surrender. The air hummed with expectation, but Jake said nothing. He stood at the center of the chamber, looking up at the thousands of representatives from 847 different worlds. His face showed no emotion. His hands hung relaxed at his sides. He simply stood and waited. Admiral Park felt her heart rate increase as the silence stretched on. This wasn't part of any plan they had discussed, but somehow she understood what Jake was doing. The silence itself was a message. Seconds turned into a minute. The aliens began to shift in their seats, confused by the lack of response. Whispered conversations started and stopped as representatives tried to understand what was happening. Dr. Stone watched the alien faces around the chamber. She could see confusion turning into concern, and concern beginning to turn into something darker. The aliens had expected words, but humans were giving them silence. 2 minutes passed. Chancellor Mordith's crystal form began to vibrate slightly, a sign of stress among his species. Other aliens made nervous sounds or gestures. The Vorthic representative's compound eyes darted back and forth, searching for some explanation. Then Clark realized what was happening. The silence was destroying the aliens' carefully planned scenario. They had prepared responses for human anger, human fear, human desperation. They had not prepared for this. 3 minutes of silence. General Turner could see security forces beginning to move closer to the human delegation. The aliens were getting nervous, and nervous aliens made mistakes. But Jake continued to stand perfectly still, his eyes moving slowly across the chamber. Prime Counselor Zarthex finally broke. The ancient being's voice cracked slightly as he spoke. "Human Morrison, the Council requires your response. The agreed time for deliberation has passed." Jake turned his head to look directly at the old being. For a moment, their eyes met across the vast space of the chamber. Then Jake smiled. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who had just realized they held all the cards in a game. Everyone else thought they were losing. Admiral Park felt a chill run down her spine. She had seen that smile before, during the war with the Centauri rebels. It was the smile Jake wore when he was about to do something that would change everything. Jake Morrison looked around the chamber one more time. When he spoke, his voice was calm and clear, but somehow it seemed to fill every corner of the enormous space. "The Terran Federation acknowledges that it has heard the Galactic Council's terms." The aliens relaxed slightly. Finally, the human was ready to discuss their surrender. Jake paused, letting the weight of his words settle. In that pause, Dr. Stone could hear her own heartbeat. She could hear the breathing of 1,000 different species. She could hear the hum of the station's machinery far below. Then Jake spoke again, and his words hit the chamber like a physical blow. "We decline." The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Aliens jumped to their feet across the chamber. Voices rose in dozens of different languages, creating a sound like a storm breaking over the station. Security forces moved toward the human delegation, but stopped when they realized the humans weren't making any threatening moves. Chancellor Mordith's crystal form rang like a bell as vibrations of shock ran through it. The Vorthic representative's wings buzzed so loudly they could be heard over the chaos. Even the ancient Zarthex looked stunned. Through it all, Jake Morrison stood perfectly still. He didn't try to explain humanity's decision. He didn't argue. with the alien demands. He didn't threaten or plead or negotiate. He had said everything that needed to be said in 2 simple words. Admiral. Park understood that they had just crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Humanity had formally rejected the authority of the Galactic Council. There would be consequences, and they would probably be terrible. But as she looked at her teammates, she saw no fear in their faces. Ben Clark's diplomatic mask had finally slipped, revealing the steel underneath. Dr. Stone was recording everything with steady hands. General Turner looked almost relieved, like a man who had been waiting for a fight to finally begin. The chaos in the chamber grew louder. Aliens shouted at each other and at the humans. Security forces received conflicting orders through their communication devices. Representatives demanded explanations that weren't coming. Jake Morrison raised his hand, and somehow the gesture cut through the noise. The chamber gradually fell quiet as thousands of beings focused on the human leader. Jake spoke again, his voice carried across the silence like a blade. "Representatives of the galaxy," he said, "humanity thanks you for your guidance. We will consider your wisdom as we chart our own course among the stars." The words were polite, but the meaning was clear. Humanity would make its own decisions about its future. The galaxy's approval was neither needed nor wanted. Prime Counselor Zarthex found his voice, though it shook with age and fury. "Human Morrison, you do not understand what you are choosing. Your species stands alone against the combined might of the galaxy. This is not wisdom. This is suicide." Jake looked at the ancient being with something that might have been pity. "Counselor," he said quietly, "humans have been choosing the difficult path since we first looked up at the stars. We didn't ask for your permission to leave our world, and we don't need it to make our way in the galaxy." He paused, and his next words would be remembered by every species present for generations to come. "We'll see you out there." Then Jake Morrison did something that no species had ever done in the history of the Galactic Council. He turned his back on 847 civilizations and walked toward the exit. His team followed without a word. Jake Morrison's footsteps echoed through the silent chamber as he walked toward the exit. Behind him, 847 species watched in growing horror as they began to understand what they had just witnessed. Admiral Lisa Park fell into step beside Jake, her military bearing perfect, despite the chaos they were leaving behind. Her boots clicked against the chamber floor with mechanical precision, each step marking humanity's rejection of galactic authority. Ben Clark followed, his diplomat's briefcase swinging gently at his side. For 30 years, he had negotiated with alien species, always working within the framework of galactic law. Now he was walking away from that framework entirely, and he felt lighter with every step. Dr. Rachel Stone came next, her recording equipment capturing the sounds of Empire's foundation cracking. She had spent her career studying alien civilizations, learning their customs, and respecting their traditions. But today she had learned something more important. Some things were worth more than respect. General Kyle Turner brought up the rear, his hand resting casually on his sidearm. His eyes swept the chamber one last time, noting the positions of security forces and the faces of alien leaders. He was already thinking about what would come next, and he was not afraid. The human delegation moved through the chamber like a knife cutting through silk. Aliens scattered out of their path, not from fear of violence, but from fear of what the humans represented. Here was a species that had looked at the entire established order of the galaxy and simply said no. Chancellor Mordith's crystal form vibrated with frequencies that hurt the ears of nearby aliens. He had spent 3 days carefully building the case for human containment. He had presented irrefutable evidence of human violations. He had offered generous terms for surrender, and the humans had walked away. The Vorthic representative's wings buzzed frantically as she tried to process what was happening. Her species had joined the galaxy 50,000 years ago after accepting similar restrictions. They had followed the rules, stayed within their boundaries, and eventually earned a place at the galactic table. The humans had rejected that path entirely. Jake reached the chamber, doors without looking back. The massive portals, designed to impress visitors with the galaxy's power and majesty, seemed small and meaningless now. He put his hand on the door control and paused. For just a moment, he considered turning around. He could still apologize, still negotiate, still find a way for humanity to fit into the galactic order. It would mean accepting restrictions on human freedom, but it would also mean peace. Then he thought about the children growing up on human colonies throughout the galaxy. Children who would never know they had been free if humanity accepted the Council's turns today. Children who would grow up as subjects rather than citizens. Jake pressed the control, and the doors began to open. The sound they made was like thunder rolling across the chamber. As the gap widened, the noise from outside filtered in. Other aliens throughout the station had heard about the meeting. They were waiting to see how humanity would respond to the galaxy's ultimatum. They were about to get their answer. Admiral Park stepped through the doorway first, her head held high. The corridor outside was filled with aliens from dozens of species, all craning their necks to see the human delegation. When they saw her uniform and the determination on her face, conversations died away. Ben Clark emerged next, nodding politely to the aliens as if he had just finished a routine trade negotiation. His calm demeanor was more unsettling than any angry speech could have been. He looked like a man who had exactly what he wanted. Dr. Stone followed, her recording equipment still running. She was documenting the end of one era and the beginning of another. Historians would study these moments for centuries, trying to understand how a single species had changed the balance of galactic power. General Turner was the last to leave the chamber. Before the doors closed behind him, he turned back to look at the assembled representatives one final time. His gaze swept across the thousands of alien faces, and many of them looked away from his eyes. Then he spoke, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics despite the distance. "We'll see you out there." The words were simple, but they carried a promise that made the aliens' blood run cold. Humanity wouldn't hide on their 12 permitted worlds. They wouldn't accept alien oversight. They wouldn't bow to galactic authority. They would be out there, among the stars, doing exactly what they pleased. The chamber doors closed with a final, definitive sound. Inside the chamber, chaos erupted. Representatives shouted at each other in dozens of languages. Security forces requested orders that no one seemed able to give. Council members demanded explanations for something that had never happened before in galactic history. Councilor Zarthex sat in his chair like a statue, his ancient mind trying to process what humanity had just done. In millions of years of galactic civilization, no species had ever simply rejected the Council's authority. Young races might argue about the terms of their membership, but they always accepted some form of galactic oversight. Humans had rejected the entire concept. Chancellor Mordith's crystal form continued to vibrate with stress frequencies. The carefully planned intervention had become a disaster. Instead of containing humanity, they had driven them away from any pretense of galactic law. The Drakmari general stood slowly, his massive form casting shadows across nearby representatives. When he spoke, his voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "What have we done?" The question hung in the air like smoke. The aliens had tried to cage humanity and discovered something terrifying. Humans couldn't be caged. They would rather stand alone against impossible odds than accept limitations on their freedom. Outside the chamber, Jake Morrison and his team walked through corridors filled with staring aliens. Their footsteps echoed off the metal walls, marking time like a funeral march for the old galactic order. They boarded their ship without ceremony. The engines powered up with a quiet hum that somehow seemed louder than thunder. As they pulled away from Nexus Prime Station, Jake looked back at the massive structure one last time. It still looked impressive, with its thousands of docking bays and its millions of inhabitants. But it also looked smaller somehow, like a building that had lost its purpose. Admiral Park activated the ship's communication system and sent a simple message back to Earth. Mission complete. Returning home. The message didn't explain what had happened in the council chamber. It didn't describe the aliens' ultimatum or humanity's response. Those details would come later, in full reports and official statements. But the message contained everything that mattered. Humanity was coming home, and they were coming home free. Behind them, the galaxy watched in fear as humanity disappeared into the void. For the first time in galactic history, a species had chosen independence over integration, freedom over security, uncertainty over control. The aliens had offered humanity a place in their carefully ordered civilization. Humans had chosen to make their own place among the stars instead. And somewhere in the darkness between worlds, humanity began to write the next chapter of galactic history. A chapter that would be written in human words, according to human values. Without asking anyone's permission, the galaxy would never be the same.